Welcome to the channel. Does the desert scare you? Could it become a death trap? The Mojave Desert stretched beneath a sky that knew no mercy. Hundreds of miles of land lay like the scorched memory of the world, stripped down to the bone, to the very essence. There were no sounds except the rustle of the wind, sliding between the stones like the breath of an invisible beast. It seemed that the earth itself slept here, but in its dream it watched over anyone daring to step upon its back. Vail arrived in these lands at the end of autumn, when the sun no longer burned but smoldered like coal forgotten in a hearth. He drove along an old road that came from somewhere deep in the state, disappearing into the silence of salt flats and dry riverbeds. His car trembled from fatigue, as if alive, and the sand beating against the body reminded him that everything in this place is erased by time. He sought not gold, nor treasure, nor fame. He was drawn by silence, the silence that begins where human speech ends. For many years he had lived in cities, hearing the noise of human nests, and one day realized he could no longer distinguish his own thoughts, only the echo of others. Then he sold everything he had, left his house on the outskirts, and headed to where even thoughts lose their voice. On the first day he stopped at the foot of a low ridge, where the stones were black, as if scorched by fire. The air here trembled, not from heat, but from something else, something indescribable. Ethan felt it in his gut, a light pulse, barely perceptible, like the heartbeat of the earth. He stood listening, and it seemed to him that the desert was breathing. He set up camp in the shadow of a rock, carved by time. At night the wind crawled between the stones, whispering words that did not exist. The sky was so thick with stars that it seemed a living dome, slowly bending over him. Ethan could not sleep for a long time, listening to the sand rustle under the wind. He imagined that beneath the surface someone walked, not an animal, not a human, but something that knew the ancient breath of the world. With the first rays of the sun he moved forward, armed only with a compass and a faint sense of direction. In the distance, beyond the bands of salt flats, hills rose whose outlines resembled the waves of a frozen sea. He walked toward them, feeling with each step the desert drawing closer, not in space, but in essence. The day stretched like a dream. The air was dry as ash. Sometimes he found remnants of old camps, a rusty flask, a half-decayed boot, an inscription on a stone faded beyond recognition. All this spoke of those who had come here before him, seekers, wanderers, the nameless. Their traces vanished, but the desert remembered them all. It absorbed everyone who entered its bounds, like water absorbing salt. By evening he reached a gorge that split the ridge in two. Shadows there were dense, and the wind seemed colder than it should have been. On the stones lay a white residue, like ash, and Ethan studied it for a long time, not daring to enter. Deep within the gorge the air trembled. The vibration was almost physical, as if someone played on strings stretched beneath the ground. He stood, staring into the darkness, and felt a strange recognition awaken within him. There was something pre-human, pre-linguistic in this place. It did not inspire fear, rather a feeling of ancient memory, as if he had already been here once, long before his life, in another body, in another time. Ethan did not enter. He stood until the darkness of the gorge blended with the darkness of the sky, and then slowly turned back. He knew he would return here, but did not know why. Night caught him on the plain. He lit a small fire, and the flame trembled like a frightened soul. In the light of the fire the surrounding stones appeared as faces, silent, indifferent, watching him from eternity. Ethan realized that the desert was not just a place. It was a being. It lived by the breath of the wind, the pulse of the sun, the gaze of the stars. He sat for a long time, staring into the fire, until he realized he heard something besides the crackle of the branches. A faint low sound, barely perceptible, like a distant heartbeat. He lifted his eyes, and saw that in the place where the horizon should have been, a light was slowly rising. Not the moon, not a fire, not the reflection of a machine, something soft, pale, almost silver. The light did not move, but it grew, like a breath. He wanted to stand, but his body seemed not to obey. The power of this light was not in its brightness, but in the silence that followed it. Everything froze, even the wind. The flames of the fire solidified as if sculpted from glass. The sand did not stir. Ethan sat, feeling that the world around him had frozen on the edge between inhalation and exhalation. At that moment he thought that the desert really was breathing. But not like a living being, rather, like something eternal that for a moment decided to remind itself of its presence. When the light faded, night returned, as if nothing had happened. Ethan lay on the ground and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come. In his ears still sounded the resonant echo, and he realized that the desert had accepted him. He did not know why he had come here, but now he felt, it was waiting for him. Morning came without a sound, like a shadow arriving. Above the desert the sun did not rise, it surfaced as if from the very earth, and its light did not warm but revealed every grain of sand, every crack in the stone, like a wound. The air was motionless, and even insects, if they existed here, dared not disturb the peace. Ethan rose slowly, as if afraid to awaken something beneath him. His eyes were heavy, but in his mind reigned clarity, cold, like the dawn. Everything around seemed oddly precise, the lines of the hills, the curves of riverbeds, animal bones polished by the wind, gleaming in the sand like charred elephants. He felt that the night had left a mark in him. Not a memory, but a silence, compacted like metal. It did not leave him. Even the wind, which soon blew, seemed a continuation of that silence, only in another form. He gathered his things, unhurriedly. The water in his bottle was warm and smelled of iron. He drank a little, looking west, where a ridge, split by a gorge, loomed dark. Now, in daylight, it looked different, silently gaping, like the trace of a claw on the skin of the earth. Ethan felt drawn there, not by curiosity, not by the thirst for discovery, but by something deeper, akin to return. The desert seemed to call him. Not with words, not with sounds, but with an inner motion, as if every particle of air leaned slowly in one direction. He walked, and the sand beneath his feet whispered to him, not in human language, but in the tongue spoken by stones. With each step he felt that he was not moving forward, but sinking, not into sand, but into an unknown depth of time. Here there was no future or past, all that existed was only breath. It filled the space, flowing through it like an underground river. Sometimes he stopped and closed his eyes. Inside him resonated the same pulse he had heard at night, dull, prolonged, like the heart of the sky. He felt it beneath him, in the depths of the earth, and somewhere inside, in his chest, in his temples. All of it was part of one pulsation, ancient as light itself. By noon Ethan reached the beginning of the gorge. The air here had become dense, like water. He stood at the entrance, and the vibration that yesterday had seemed distant now passed through his body like an electric current. At first light, almost gentle, then increasingly strong, to the pain in his teeth, to the ringing in his bones. He stepped back, and it weakened. Another step forward, and it returned, like an invisible wave. He stopped, not daring to go further. But it was not fear that held him back, rather, a sense of the sacred. It seemed he stood before the threshold of a temple, built neither by humans nor for humans. The rocks on both sides resembled wings. In the sun their surfaces gleamed like rusted mirrors, reflecting the sky. Inside the gorge the darkness was not merely absence of light, it had weight, depth, breadth. Ethan stared into it, and the longer he looked, the more alive it seemed. He remained at the entrance, not daring to enter. Instead, he knelt, touching the ground with his palm. The sand was cold, unnaturally cold for the desert. And beneath him, deep down, he felt a slight trembling, as if someone or something moved beneath the surface. He was not afraid. Rather, he was seized by a strange humility, as if all that was happening was natural, like the breath of the world. He remained there, unaware of how long. Time in the desert was not measured by hours, it flowed differently, breaking apart and merging, like smoke. Finally, he rose, feeling weak, and walked back. But turning around, he noticed that on the stones at the entrance of the gorge remained traces, not his, not animal. They resembled handprints, stretched upward, as if someone centuries ago had tried to hold the stone before disappearing into it. For a moment it seemed to him that the prints moved, not literally, but like shadows shifting when looking into water. He blinked, and everything vanished. But the impression remained, the feeling that the stone was alive, and the gorge breathed just like the sands. By evening he returned to his camp. The sun set slowly, coloring the sky in shades of blood and copper. The wind fell silent. The world seemed scorched, but pure, as after a revelation. He lay on the ground, not lighting a fire. The sky hung so low that the stars seemed to touch the earth. He felt that the tremor coming from the gorge had not left him, but entered his very consciousness. It was now in every breath. Before falling asleep, Ethan thought that perhaps all life on earth is merely a manifestation of the desert's own breath. That when a person dies, the sands inhale them back into themselves, and the darkness beneath the ground keeps every breath as a note in an eternal melody. He fell asleep, and in his dream saw endless plains, under which flowed a river of light, not white, not golden, but the color of time yet to come. The river flowed deep into the earth, and from it rose forms, shadows with no faces, yet carrying all that had ever been. One of the shadows stopped, bent toward him, and he saw his own face, battered by wind, covered in sand, yet calm, as of one sleeping. He awoke at dawn, and the desert greeted him with silence. No trace of the night visions, no hint of the strange light. Only the sands, only the wind, and a faint echo beneath his feet, a reminder that the earth beneath him is alive. He understood that he would stay here. Not for a day, not for a week, until the desert revealed what it keeps beneath its breaths. Thus began Ethan Vail's journey into the heart of the Mojave, where the sands remember more than the stars, and where every step becomes a question to which there is no answer. The day began with a heavy light, as if alive. It slowly spread across the hills, flooding every crack in the rocks and turning the sand into the finest gold. Ethan walked, feeling that with every step the desert became denser, thicker, like a fabric woven from time itself. Every sound here was not merely a sound, the wind slid across stones and sandy dunes, whispering words that did not exist, yet were felt in the chest. The wind shifted. It carried not only the warmth of the sun but something ancient, something deep, pulling Ethan forward. He sensed an invisible presence, as if someone or something watched his every step. The grains of sand seemed alive, shifting to form patterns that existed only for a moment before dissolving beneath his feet. As he approached the central part of the gorge, the air thickened, as if flesh itself had weight. The sun illuminated something he had not noticed before, a subtle curvature in the rock, barely visible, yet precise enough to make his heart race. The shape resembled a letter, the letter M, carved by time and wind. Ethan felt the vibration, barely perceptible from a distance, grow stronger as he neared. It penetrated his chest, his skull, every cell, giving the sense that the earth itself pulsed and breathed. He stopped at the edge of this strange curve. The vibration became an audible hum, like a distant ringing of bells stretched across millions of years. Ethan felt fear arise within him, not the kind that provokes flight, but a fear of reverence, deep and primordial. He sensed the presence of something waiting for him, not a human, not a beast, but an entity ancient and beyond comprehension. He sat on a stone, studying the shape. Sunlight created the illusion that the lines of the rock moved, trembled, breathed. The wind grew stronger, and with it the vibration thickened, almost material. It seemed that one step forward would carry him into a current that would take him beyond this world. Ethan understood, the desert was not merely a place. It was an archive of all living and dead, a repository of memory that groaned and whispered when someone dared to listen. He saw faint lines emerge in the sands, patterns like the traces of an invisible being. They led to the cave, to the heart of this form, to the very center of the vibration. He moved slowly toward the entrance, and every grain of sand beneath his feet responded to his steps, as if the earth itself welcomed him. The air was dense, almost transparent, and he could feel a slight trembling of the stones, a quiver like the breath of a sleeping mountain. Everything here obeyed not the laws of physics but something older, something that observed without revealing itself. Approaching the cave, Ethan felt a change not only in the external world but within himself. Thoughts began to lose shape, memory of the city, of people, of the past became blurred. All that remained was the sense of breath, pulsation, and pull. He realized that this vibration was not a threat but an invitation, a call he had awaited all his life, though he had never understood it. Inside the cave, time seemed to shift. Light filtering through cracks formed strange patterns on the walls, lines intersecting in ways the mind could not fully comprehend. Shadows moved independently of their source, and Ethan felt the space contract and expand simultaneously. He stopped and touched the rock with his hand. He felt cold, depth, and strength, as if touching the very core of the earth. The vibration intensified, and in that moment he understood, this place was not meant to be understood. It was meant to be seen, felt, and accepted. The desert whispered through stones, through sand, through vibration, and Ethan felt his existence, his breath, and his heart become part of something greater, ancient and unyielding. The world beyond the cave ceased to exist. He stepped inside and immediately felt resistance, not physical but spiritual. Something within him screamed a warning that the way back was no longer possible. The vibration wrapped around his body, and he understood that he had crossed the line where human consciousness and fear held no meaning. With each step further, the cave unfolded before him, as if a living being shaping itself to test the newcomer. Ethan walked slowly, aware of each moment, each movement. The sand beneath his feet became cold, then soft, then as if it absorbed his steps. Deep within the cave, he felt absolute solitude, and simultaneously complete belonging. All the space was his body and his thought, and thought was part of the space. He realized that this place was not merely a desert, not merely earth. It was the keeper of all that had been and would be, and his soul had now become part of that keeping. There, in the heart of the cave, Ethan felt the last remnants of his past vanish. He was no longer a human as he had been, he became the breath of the desert, part of its eternal pulse, its voice, its silence. And when the last glimmer of light faded, and the vibration reached its full density, Ethan Vail ceased to exist as he had been known. The desert had claimed him, as it had claimed all who had ever walked its sands. Outside, everything looked the same, the sun, the stones, the wind. Not a trace of man. Only the sands breathed. The Mojave Desert did not forgive weakness. Each morning brought a new light, but it was not pure, it burned and smoldered at once, reflecting in the sands like the seal of a forgotten world. Ethan walked along hills carved by the wind, and the farther he went, the denser the atmosphere became, as if the desert itself wished to test him. The sand underfoot became inconsistent, sometimes soft, swallowing his steps, sometimes hard, returning every sound back into the air. Dust, lifted by his movements, hung like thousands of fine webs, catching the light and bending it beyond recognition. The wind roared, yet it was no mere wind, it was the voice of the desert, quiet, slow, penetrating the mind and forcing him to see what did not exist. He realized that every step left a trace not only on the ground but in the very space that the desert kept for itself. The traces, like imprints of a soul, vanished from beneath his feet but remained in the vibration of the air, in the trembling of stones, in the slight quiver of dry bushes. Everything was alive, everything remembered. Ethan reached the gorge, where he first saw the form resembling the letter M. Now it looked different, the lines seemed elongated, stretching into the earth. The stones around vibrated, but not locally, they radiated something felt throughout the body, like one's own heartbeat. He understood that he was approaching a point where ordinary senses ceased to function. The vibration intensified, turning into a deep hum, penetrating every cell. Ethan realized that if he entered, there would be no turning back, and this knowledge did not frighten him but laid bare the inner void he had always carried. He dropped to his knees, touching the cold stones, and felt the sand beneath him tremble, as if someone or something moved under the surface. Every sound, every gust of wind became part of a single whole, the breath of the earth, the rhythm of time, stretched and folded simultaneously here. Ethan began to descend into the cave. The walls became denser, the vibration grew, turning into a hum that could no longer be ignored. The light from outside dissolved, leaving only twilight, but Ethan's eyes gradually adjusted. He saw the shadows on the walls writhe, forming patterns that changed faster than thoughts could grasp. Each shadow was alive, not an image, but a consciousness observing him, studying, testing. He understood that any movement could leave an indelible mark in this world. He walked cautiously, feeling the space around thicken, the air becoming heavy and almost tangible. Suddenly, deep within, he noticed movement. Not an object, not an animal, something without form, yet present. It slid between lines of light and dark, following him, reflecting in every thought, every breath. Ethan realized the desert knew his name. It knew his purpose, his past, his fears. It was waiting to test him. He stopped and sat on a stone, trying to sense the nature of what followed him. The desert seemed to answer through vibration, through the trembling sand under his feet. Everything around breathed, every stone, every crack, every grain of sand. Ethan realized he was at the threshold of a world where life and death were indistinguishable, where a man could vanish, yet his trace would remain forever. He continued forward, and with each step, the sense of time lost meaning. Minutes stretched, disappeared, flashed in moments. He saw lines leading deep into the cave, not drawn by human hands, they were carved by time, wind, and something far older. Midway, he felt a heat that did not come from the sun. The vibration became a current, engulfing his entire body. His breath merged with the breath of the desert, his thoughts became part of its eternal rhythm. Ethan understood that he no longer controlled his actions, his steps, his gaze, his breath, all became instruments of this ancient entity. He reached the end of the cave, where the space opened into a vast chamber. The air was dense as water, and the vibration reached its peak. The stones trembled, the sand underfoot shimmered with a light that did not exist. Ethan realized he had become part of something far greater than man, than life, than death. And in that moment he heard silence, not simply absence of sound, but presence, dense, almost material. It enveloped him, absorbing his breath, thoughts, fear, and resolve. The desert had finally revealed its heart. Ethan understood, the trace he left would remain forever, but there was no return. He knelt in the center of the chamber. The vibration, the trembling, the breathing, all merged into a single whole. He felt his body dissolve, leaving only consciousness, which now belonged to the desert. Outside, everything seemed quiet. The sands breathed as usual, the wind slid over the hills, and the sun slowly rose over the horizon as always. But deep within the cave remained a trace that no one would ever see again, the trace of a man who dared to enter the heart of the Mojave. In the heart of the desert, where the sands merged with the sky and the wind whispered in a language understood only by those who truly listened, Ethan Vail stood before the cave. It was like a wound on the body of the earth, narrow, yet deep, its dark maw seeming to pull him inward with a force beyond measure. He stepped closer. The air at the entrance was heavy, as if packed with time itself. The vibration he had felt since the first day had transformed into a hum here, penetrating the body, forcing every cell to contract and expand simultaneously. The sand underfoot trembled, responding to the breath of the cave. Ethan did not hesitate. Every step was synchronized with the pulse of the earth. He felt that everything around him was part of a single whole, the stones, the sand, the wind, the vibration, himself. Inside him there was no fear, only the realization that here the end and beginning, death and life, reality and darkness, merged into one. The M-shaped cave unfolded before him like an ancient temple. Its walls were of black stone, etched with patterns impossible to replicate. They vibrated, emitting low, almost imperceptible waves, which seemed like the consciousness of the earth itself. Ethan entered, and the air wrapped him like flesh, the vibration penetrating deeper than ever before. The farther he went, the less time was felt. Moments stretched, flowed, vanished. He saw shadows on the walls transform into figures, neither human nor animal, each carrying a sense of ancientness and expectation. The stones whispered stories to him that no one had ever heard, of civilizations that had vanished, of beings that were never human, of the very breath of the earth. Deep inside the cave, the air became thick, almost solid. He heard the sand outside oscillating in rhythm with an invisible pulse. There, in the very center, he saw a strange formation, a stone carved into the exact shape of the letter M. It stood like a sentinel of eternity, and around it, the vibration intensified to an incredible peak. Ethan stepped closer. Ice ran through his bones. The cave did not merely wait for him, it knew him, felt every desire, every thought. He touched the stone, and the world around dissolved, sounds, smells, form, everything became part of a single current. He realized that he had stepped beyond the boundary of life, beyond human comprehension. With each moment, he felt his body vanish. It dissolved into the vibration, into the sand, into the breath of the desert. His consciousness remained, but it no longer belonged to him. It had become part of something ancient and eternal, that watched over the desert and everything that had ever come here. Ethan understood that there was no exit. The desert had consumed him completely. The trace he had left dissolved as if it had never existed. Only the sands continued to breathe, holding the vibration, memory, and whisper of the one who dared enter the heart of the Mojave. Outside, the cave appeared quiet and empty. Nothing betrayed the presence of the one who had entered. The sun slowly drifted above the horizon, the wind rustled across the sands again, as if the world continued its ordinary life. Yet beneath the earth, a hum trembled, the echo of eternity, in which a fragment of a human soul remained. Thus ended the journey of Ethan Vail. He vanished not with a cry nor with struggle, but quietly, under the hum of the earth and the breath of the desert, leaving the world beyond the cave unchanged, yet forever altered. No traces remained except a barely perceptible trembling of the sand, quiet as the whisper of time, reminding that the desert remembers everything that comes and vanishes, and that some secrets are never meant to be revealed. The Mojave breathed, slowly, deeply, with eternal silence. And no one, except the desert, knew where Ethan Vail had gone. The Mojave Desert was silent, but it was not the silence of emptiness, it was silence full of meaning. Every grain of sand, every crack in the stones held the breath of centuries, and nothing human could disturb this rhythm. The wind slid over the dunes, repeating the steps of the one who had gone, and every movement of the sand resonated with a deep hum, almost like the echo of a heart. In the cave, at its very heart, everything that had been Ethan Vail disappeared. His body dissolved, his consciousness merged with the vibration of the earth, and he became part of something far greater. Time lost all meaning, space flowed, folded, repeated, and vanished, as if the desert itself played with eternity. He realized that death here was not the end. Ethan became the breath, part of the pulse of the earth, and with every moment felt the past and the future intertwining into a single infinite now. All his fears, desires, memories, everything dissolved into the hum, which was at once his body and his consciousness. Outside, in the world of humans, no one noticed Ethan's disappearance. The desert returned to its familiar visage, the sun sank over the hills, shadows lengthened, and the wind once more rustled through the sand. Yet every movement, every breath of air carried the memory of the one who had crossed the threshold of the cave. The sands breathed a quiet, eternal echo, containing a fragment of the human soul. Ethan understood that he was no longer merely an observer but a guardian. His consciousness became part of a flow that ran through the earth and stones, through time and space, connecting all living things with what had long since departed. Yet this awareness was both liberation and torment. He felt the vastness of the desert, its antiquity, its relentless beauty, and eternal serenity. And in this absolute silence came the understanding: no one ever returns from the place where law and human knowledge lose their power. Everything that comes here dissolves, leaving only traces, vibrations, whispers, echoes, detectable only by rare, brave souls. Ethan ceased to exist as a human. He became the eternal memory of the sands, part of their breath and their force. His presence remained only as a faint trembling under the feet of those who passed by, unaware that the earth preserved secrets no mortal had dared to dream of. Thus, the Mojave Desert continued to live. Within its heart lay secrets impossible to unravel, stories without end, and a breath in which eternity resounded. And in this eternal whisper, Ethan Vail remained forever, vanished to the world of men, but alive forever in the desert itself. Thus ended the journey of Ethan Vail. He disappeared not with a cry nor with struggle, but quietly, under the hum of the earth and the breath of the desert, leaving the world beyond the cave unchanged, yet forever altered. No traces remained, save for the faintest trembling of the sand, quiet as the whisper of time, reminding that the desert remembers everything that comes and vanishes, and that some secrets are never meant to be revealed. The Mojave breathed, slowly, deeply, in eternal silence. And no one, except the desert, knew where Ethan Vail had gone. Its sands breathed. And they remembered everything.